Does anybody else need a book before we begin? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. We appreciate the presence of everyone. Again, whether here physically in the auditorium, whether you are watching at home there on the live stream, your interest in things spiritual are greatly appreciated. Before we begin the class there, let's have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful to you for the night's rest that we've had, for the blessing and opportunity of coming together this morning to hear and study from your word. Father, help us to always love your word. Help us to appreciate the things that are contained in it. Help us, Father, to study with open minds. Help us to always be respectful of each other there in this classroom setting. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, continuing our study of Ecclesiastes, still, I don't suppose anyone's surprised, still in the first lesson, worked our way up to verse 4 of the first chapter, and we looked at this slide there last week, and we'll just pick up here because I think it's going to be the easiest place. But verse 3 had asked the question, as Solomon posed that, what advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? Yeah. As you look at the bottom of the screen there, and the question repeated, what advantage does man have? And you see the routine there. You get up today, and then the next day, and you repeat the process. Your routine just goes on and on and on until the end of life. And we looked at this slide last week, because we wonder, what at the end of life, all these things you've worked for, none of it is in that U-Haul. There's that hearse is pulling it through the cemetery. There, you will never there see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. And the comment was made last week that you can't take it with you. I've literally had people tell me they were going to try. Now, I never ask questions after that. If somebody is, if they are bold enough or somehow, I hate to say mentally deficient. Let me say ambitious. If they are ambitious enough there to want to take what they've got with them, then great. They can see how it turns out. They don't understand. No, that's exactly right. And it was pointed out last week, I think Steve pointed out, that the Egyptian people, they attempted to take it with them. They, fill in their tombs, fill in, mummifying, their leaders to keep them preserved. The American Indian, they did the same thing, not to the extent that the Egyptians did. Of course, they didn't have as much, to try and take with them, but they still did. So, again, that shows a misunderstanding there of death and what happens at death and the aftermath. Now the question was posed, and we went over this last week, so we're not going to dwell in it. But we asked, is the preacher saying here that since it all comes to nothing, that at the end, is it really better just not to work? Well, that same preacher that again. I'm teaching this under the assumption that Solomon is the author of this book. Certainly was a Proverbs in Proverbs 6 through 11. Then we find this proverb concerning the ant, teaching us the virtues of the work ethic of an ant. And surely a lesson for us that if a really small insect with no one to guide them, no one to instruct them, no instruction book certainly except their God-given instinct, then has enough sense to work, to store up, to hedge against tomorrow, then we certainly should have that same instinct. Yes, Jack? You know, and that now, if you couldn't hear Jack, he said there may be a U-Haul. I'm paraphrasing you, Jack. There might be a U-Haul at the funeral, but they're leaving with your stuff. Somebody else is leaving with it. Now Solomon touches on that there later on. As he bemoans the fact that somebody else is going to end up with this stuff. He won't have it, and you've got no control, do you, Jack?
Yeah, but the point I'm making, that's true, but also it could be good things. What have you left people? How have you helped people? What have you given people that they can take with them?
And that's truth, and I suppose to an extent that's a subjective thing. To others, to another extent, it's an objective thing that in the amount, in your responsibilities and such as that. We'll talk about that there later on, I think, in this study. I appreciate the comment. It's well noted here. Where we at? There you are.
Yeah, sorry, I just tried to get your attention.
Well, that's hard to get, Jonathan.
So I think Solomon, Solomon really is saying there's no point in working. He really is. Like, Proverbs aside, when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, you have to kind of recognize that it's a thought process from beginning to end. It's kind of like a series of experiments with a conclusion at the end. So he's found at this experiment that, given what I see here, there's no point in doing any work or anything. And it's not until the end when it wraps up that you find the point.
He leads to that. There are, through this book, and Jonathan's right, there as he's describing the book of Ecclesiastes, throughout, now later on we'll find, where he talks, about work being a good thing. But throughout the book, you will find maybe an isolated observation. Maybe you'll find a proverb that, on the surface, maybe it doesn't seem to fit there, but if you look at it a little closer, then we understand that it does. And to Jonathan's point, yes, Solomon is working his way toward the end of this book, toward that 12th chapter. Fear God and keep his commandments. Therefore, this is the whole of man. That is what we're working toward, Sandra.
And I think as Christians, we'll get to the point where we learn we work for God.
Yes.
We work for others. We work to help other people. We work to let our light shine. And it's not about stuff. It's about being a Christian.
Now, I like, if you couldn't hear Sandra there, part of her comment says it's not about stuff. And that's a lot of this first chapter. Solomon had more stuff than all of us in this room combined. We could not begin to even approach the smallest level of his possessions. And yet he described it how? Second verse. But yeah, vanity of all his vanities. Futilities upon futility, meaningless, he says. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to take it back to the manual labor that he was talking about, the reference to the ant. It also tells us in the scriptures that a man that doesn't work shouldn't eat, and he's called a sluggard. So there is something about, we do have to work in order to eat. It's not about accumulating treasures necessarily, but we are required to work.
And such an unfortunate circumstance, and it's really, I don't suppose, different today. For as long as I'm able to remember, I can recall folks that were reluctant to work. But and I'm trying to be kind about this. Well, I'm not looking at you, no. For Sherry's sake, I'm not looking at you here. Listen, if Freddie hadn't been helping me, I'd still be out in that field if he hadn't been behind me pushing me on. Nobody believes that. Then we live in a society today where that same mentality exists. It existed in Solomon's time too. It goes all the way back, probably to the 3rd chapter of Genesis, when Adam had to start to work, and you're starting to wonder why. It may go back that far. But it seems now that we have that attitude of not working, that some parts of the government support and encourage, and again, that flies into the face of the teaching of Paul, right? If you don't work, you're not going to eat. Then when somebody says, well, I have the right to eat. No, you don't. No, you don't have the right to eat. You've got the right to work and support yourself. Jonathan?
People will say health care is a right.
Yes, they will. Yes. And boy, I tell you what, we better stop that right there, or I'll just, I'll never get past this if Jonathan's right though. Our Bill of Rights has grown, and it's still growing. It's still growing, and we'll get back to Ecclesiastes here. Yes.
I mean, me as a Christian, knowing the New Testament, I think I look at Ecclesiastes in a different light. And I would just say this, that Solomon and them, back in their day, they really didn't know. A lot of the things of the New Testament were just a total mystery to them. This idea of a afterlife with God, serving Him forever, probably they couldn't grasp that. The old law was a schoolmaster to bring the Jews to Christ. And I think that's the part, I think we kind of have to look at it that way too. He is, as Jonathan said, trying to lead these people up to, hey, look, once again, it's going to be burnt up with fervent heat. We know that as Christians. And I think that what we have to look at is nothing carnal. You can line your casket with all the dollar bills and gold bars you want. You're not taking anything carnal into that next life. So I think as Christians, we have a different outlook than Solomon and the people of his day would have had.
We have such an advantage in seeing this in retrospect. We have hindsight that Solomon didn't have. Now, I would certainly agree with you to the extent, you're talking about eternal life with God. Solomon had no knowledge of Christ. He had no foreknowledge of those teachings. But Solomon did say, concerning eternity, he has put eternity in their hearts. So he's familiar with that concept. Now, the things that surround it, all of the ins and outs, but it's the end of the carnal things. There. Okay. Appreciate the comments.
Ted,
Yes, ma'am.
we're all made in the image of God. And if we leave God out of it, then we're never content and we don't find what satisfies us. If we put God in the life and do what God says for us to do, we'll be happy.
Yeah.
That's all it makes us.
Jane, that is a timely comment. There, Jane's saying if we put God in our lives, then we'll be happy. Consider this verse, then, Matthew 16, verse 26. For what profit is it that to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? That's the man, Jane, that did not keep God in his life. Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Now, I don't know that answer. I suppose the answer to that's going to vary with individual men. The idea, the Lord's idea in saying this was nothing is worth your soul. Now, I heard a man comment once, I don't have a soul. Well, at that point, forget Steve.
This first chapter talks about there's nothing new under the sun. All things that have been done have already been done. People was ignorant of what God's will was back then. They're ignorant of what God's will is today. And to say that people wasn't knowledgeable about eternal life, spending eternity with God, does that undercut what Abraham
Are you asking me if it does?
I'm asking you.
Okay. You know,
Those who would know God's will would know God's will, and those who wouldn't.
there's one thing we need to understand here with this. Yes, and those men, had a different relationship with God than Solomon had. During that patriarchal age, as God spoke directly to men. So they had some advantage. Now, the other part of this, again, as I said, Solomon said, and we'll get to it eventually, he hath put eternity into their hearts. So God has opened that door there for that knowledge. Now, let's also remember that a lot of the people that read this, a lot of Solomon's kingdom was not made up of Jews. A lot of his kingdom were made up of heathen. And as if they read this, then it's going to be brand new to some of them. Yes, sir.
When Solomon was appointed king over Israel, what was the first thing he did? He went to God and asked God.
Yes, he did.
So he believed in God.
Yes, he did. Oh, absolutely. Solomon was not an unbeliever. No, Solomon was a believer. Solomon was a sinner. We pointed this out there last week. Solomon was not only a sinner, Solomon was a willful sinner. Now, you say, well, you might excuse him at that 5th or 10th wife, but by 700, you gotta wonder here, has he not learned yet? And apparently he didn't. Were you done, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I answered your question, but now you need to understand, I've never been somebody, well, I'm not anymore anyway. Maybe at one time I knew all the answers, but I don't anymore. Make no pretense to know them. So there's questions come up. In this book of Ecclesiastes, let me tell you that there are people considerably more qualified than I am to be able to understand this. And I'm talking about among brethren. And yet when you read different brethren's observations about some of these things, you're going to discover they don't come to the same conclusion. And again, these are people that are in fundamental agreement on about everything. But so much of this book that the lessons we get are subjective for us. I mean, we can read these things and we can make a personal application. I don't think you ever read them and make an application to somebody else. You need to make them to yourself. And any conclusion you can draw from these things that will better your life spiritually, draw it. Draw it.
Any man that ever lived on the face of this earth has known God in some form.
Right.
Might be different than we do, but they've always known God.
And
They should have.
I mean, if they want to, they've always been there for them to know.
you make a choice.
Yes.
Like Cain and Abel. They both heard the same instructions from their father, whoever they got their instructions from. And they
Yes.
made a choice. Same thing today. With every individual. Every individual would have, at the end of time, when they stand before judgment, gonna have to have the same opportunity. Either you choose what God said or you don't.
That's exactly right. And that's an excellent point to make. At the day of judgment, there's nobody to point to, is it? There's nobody you can say, well, this is their fault. We have opportunity while we live there to know, to learn, to understand, to accept, and to do. When we neglect that opportunity, then we will find ourselves in that position, that judgment that you're talking about. If God looks at you, well, you've really got not a lot to offer. Okay, so again, back to the question, so what advantage does man have in all his work? Again, if you consider these verses in Matthew 16 or that verse, the answer would be none. There is no advantage as long as our focus remains under the sun. There. when we work day by day, there, with a greater focus, with a higher focus than adding to our pile of stuff. Yeah, you know, we don't need more stuff, we need better service to God. Then, what working can actually help toward that end. Okay, well, I really didn't figure to spend 20 minutes, but hey, listen, if we need to spend 20 more, we'll do that too. Verse 4 there speaks of the futility of life's cycle. Look how that verse begins. A generation goes and a generation comes. Then, what's that mean?
One goes and one comes after it.
Never ending, is it, Jane?
It's all the same. It's a cycle.
It's a cycle. You know, you live and die. If you're born and the Lord doesn't come back before you're dead, then you're going to die. Then, and that's what he's talking about here. This is out of the book. While one section of the news lists births, another lists deaths, that doesn't change. That's part of that cycle that we're talking about. All of which is a reminder that in spite of one's self-imagined importance, life will go on without us. Now, if hopefully no one's ego is so big that they're not able to accept that. Life does go on, just as death goes on. Look at this verse from the 90th Psalm. Anybody remember who wrote this psalm? He only had one. Moses. These are the words of Moses. You hear people sometimes, well, David said, no, David didn't say this. There, Moses said this, as for the days of our life, they contain 70 years. I always like that 10. I like the poetry of that reading. Or if due to strength, 80 years, or 80, yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone, and we fly away. The song in our books, there, comes from this verse. There, I'll fly away. Now that was one of the songs that was removed from song books 60 years ago, I guess. There, for whatever reason. That was in sacred selections. There, the song wasn't used. See how that verse concludes. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Now, you read that and you say, well, Solomon's wrong in that, because the earth is not going to remain forever. Well, that's true. It's not. It's not. That's stressed over and over and over in the Scripture. Isaiah said that the earth is like a garment, that it will wear out. We understand that. But the things, that cycle that you spoke of, those things that go on every day as this world turns, as the routine things, they go on. Look, Genesis 8:22, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall never cease. Don't ever let anybody scare you into telling you those things are going to cease. Because they're not. Not because I say so. I'm nothing. But because the Lord said they will never cease. You count on it. So people say, we don't have, we do have winter. We have summer, we have fall, we have spring. Sandra?
Well, it's like if you go, say, you can't name your great-great-grandpa and great-great-grandma and all those. You can't even name your family, and then, so nobody else knows them either. And so nobody's gonna know us except on the other side. So it is a cycle, and you just better get ready. Nobody's gonna remember you.
No, and that, well, they might remember some of us for a little longer than others, but,
When we're all gone, that's it.
yeah, Sandra's right in what she's saying, and Solomon actually touches on that, later on in the chapter. we'll talk about it more. She's exactly right in this. That's part of that cycle of it going. Look what the psalmist said. He established the earth upon its foundations so that it will not totter forever and ever. I don't mean that it's never going to, the earth will never move off its axis. It's never going to tilt one way or another. Nothing's ever going to be off there in God's plan there for this planet. Okay. Anybody else?
I think that in the context that he's talking about this, it's just more of the obvious that, we aren't going to be here, but if we're not here, the earth is still going to be here.
Oh, we're going to leave it behind us. We're going to leave it behind us. I went to the cemetery in Cache yesterday after the funeral for Virginia's brother, and Freddie and I had talked about this earlier in the week, that we've got family out there, but we didn't know, we didn't know them. And as I looked, at some of those old tombstones, Sandra, that's the only way I remembered those people. I'd forgotten them, until I see that. Okay. Now he moves on here and asks the question again in your book, do you sense the monotony in Solomon's tone? In verse 5, also the sun rises, the sun sets, hastening to its place, it rises again. You see this every day. The sun, we talk about an atomic clock, being accurate. The sunset, the sunrise, sunset, a year from now is going to be exactly. You can predict it. There, you can predict these things to the second, not because of man's ingenuity, but because God has established this. We read on here, on the surface and under the sun, there appears to be no meaning to this crummy existence on planet Earth. The same rut and routine over and over, not any different when it comes to repetitive patterns of the weather. Now look how that thought continues again from verse 5. Blowing toward the south and turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular course the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full to the place where the rivers flow. They will flow again. Can you picture that? The sun rising and set, never going anywhere. The wind blowing from the north, blowing from the south, like it can't make up its mind there which way it wants to blow. All these rivers working as hard as they can. The streams working hard to fill the rivers working hard to fill the seas, to fill the oceans, and yet they never get full. They never get full. So it's an endless amount. I suppose, the question might have been posed, what advantage do these weather patterns have since they never seem to accomplish anything? Okay. We always understand, and we've talked about this a bit, that the reason for this, not accident, is it, Travis? It's not an accident. Yeah. And I'll never understand how people can believe that it is. But they do. A lot of people believe it's accidental. It's because God has set this there. And it's because God said it that there will be no variance in it. That if He promised us that it's going to be this way, it's going to. Look at this verse, these 3 verses from the 33rd Psalm. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of His mouth. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deep in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of Him, for He spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Then, brethren, friends, that's confidence for us. Then, that's assurance and that's reassurance for every one of us here. Now, we're going to read a little bit. I told Sharon on the way up here this morning, Said, if I would just stay in this book, I could move through it a little quicker there. But I think when opportunities come, there we probably need to take advantage of them right there. The 38th chapter of Job. Now, if you've never sat down, if you've never taken the time just to spend a few minutes to read that one chapter in Job, write it down in your books. If you've got a book, you got a pen, or just remember it, that Job 38. As Job had a lot of issues. He had a lot of problems. He had a lot of calamity in his life. And is again, Kathy, one of my favorite things that I heard Dick say years ago. Job had lost everything except the one thing he could afford to lose, and that was his wife. There, because she kept trying to pull him away from God. There, curse God and die. Then Job refused, but he questioned God in this. And you look at this 38th chapter. Then, as this begins, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it, on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who enclosed the sea with doors? When bursting forth it went out from the womb." And continuing in verse 9, "When I made a cloud its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther, and here shall your proud waves stop. Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place?" He's asking Job. He said, "Can you make the sun rise?" That's essentially what he's saying to him here. Then, you see how humbling this is? Now this is God. And I read it. Let's jump down. Let's look at the 18th verse before I go on. Again, another question to Job. Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Freddie, you remember what Daddy used to say to us when he wanted our attention?
There's several things.
Well, there were several things, but you remember this? Yes. You boys better hear me. Yeah, you boys better hear me. And we better. This is what God's saying to Job right here. You better hear me. You have no right to question me. Then again, this is reassurance for us that this is our hope in our faith. That everything stays in place day to day because of God's will. Not because of anything we're doing, because of God's will. That this world never gets off the smallest fraction of an inch there as it turns, as it circles there, because it's God's will. Now, Jane, this gets, I think, to a comment you had made earlier in class about the fact that people should know Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Paul's saying that there's no excuse not to believe in God there, because all you have to do there is see around you, to see the power of God, there to understand that in all of man's wisdom, in all of man's efforts, in all of our abilities, we can't build a car that's going to last. We can't build anything that's going to last. There, it might last till the warranty It expires on what? But it's going to break. It's going to wear out. It's going to break. As long as God wills it, then this world is here. Okay. In verse 8, there we see Solomon say there, and Wilson says, see him as he writes with a sad, deep sigh. All things are wearisome. Now your translation might read, all things are full of labor. There. All things. There. I mean, you think about your routine. Then the thing we have to work at so many things. There. We work to eat. There. We have to work at keeping our health up, at keeping our stomachs fed, at keeping our bodies clean. And anything at all there that we do involves effort. Then it does. Now, look how he concludes there, or goes on in that verse. Man's not able to tell it. And I'm sure that everybody in this room has something you wanted to say really bad. But you couldn't find the words, to be able to say it where anybody could understand it. Maybe there aren't enough words. Maybe our imagination, maybe our intellect, maybe our wisdom all falls short in trying to explain these things. And Solomon backs that up. Our lives are such, they're wearisome, they're full of labor. We're not able to express our day-to-day routine in adequate words. Steve? Yeah, I thought you had something to say. Oh, no? Okay.
Got a lot to say, but
Okay. The second part of that verse, then, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. Now let me understand this. The picture that's about to pop up here, I sought and received permission from the family there of this youngster to show this there, because I think maybe it might help convey this idea of dissatisfaction. Now I did promise him that I wouldn't say who it was, but I will say I don't know whatever happened to him. I will say it was one of my mother's favorite pictures. And it was. And I do happen to know this. Now, whatever look that might entail, it had nothing to do with being unsatisfied or angry. I have it on good source that he told his mother that he was just trying to look cool there in this picture. So we'll move to another picture, which maybe, is there anybody that don't know this kid? Really, is there anybody that don't know? You've seen this boy. Now, he's just got everything he wants for Christmas, right? And that's after. That's after. He wanted to go to McDonald's. He went. He got his Happy Meal, got his toy, and he's still he's not happy. That's part of this teaching. That we need to understand contentment in our lives. How do we achieve contentment? Godliness with contentment, finish that, Jane, is great gain. Yeah, godliness with contentment, great gain. So we've got that. Paul said that he had learned to be content no matter what state there he was in. Now, again, that's only part of the teaching here, I believe, and we'll see how much time we got. Consider these verses, then, or actually just one verse, two translations. Well, no, as far as I know, we have no record of the Apostle Paul being in Arkansas. Again, so far as we know, I guess we could just add North America to that, couldn't we? Or yeah. Proverbs 27:20. Hell and destruction are never full. Your translation may say Hades there and destruction are never full. So the eyes of man are never satisfied. Now, a lot of your translations will read this way, there with the Greek words not being used and the Hebrew, Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, nor are the eyes of man ever satisfied. Some translations will say, they'll say death and destruction then are never full. And really that's what this is. Sheol, our Greek word is Hades, for that the realm of the dead. The word that Jesus used there, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, as it says in some translations, shall not prevail against it. Other translations say the gates of Hades or death shall not prevail against it. And that's the idea here. Abaddon simply means destruction there. So however you want to read that, we understand that those things, there's always room for one more. That no matter what, there, whether it's death, whether it's destruction, there always will. I can't remember. It's from Proverbs. I should have wrote it down. I didn't. But Solomon named 4 things that were never ever satisfied. Well, one I think was Sheol. The one that really stood out in my mind was talking about the land receiving water. There's always room there as the land soaks up the water. It's always willing there to take more at some point. So again, he also mentioned the womb of a barren woman. There was something, and one other thing, which, someday I will learn to write these things down. But let's look at this from a different standpoint. There, not so much in a negative light of being discontent, but simply and as we live, as we operate day to day. If you ask yourself, have you seen everything you want to see? That's probably everybody's head going to know, because there's always something, things you've seen and you want to see them again. The sunset. There, it's the same sun. It's the same sun. It's the same place in the sky, and yet the beauty of it changes. Sometimes it's always enough to make you say, look how beautiful that is. A rainbow. I mean, is there anybody here that doesn't notice a rainbow? I mean, when it pops up, we do. We do. Again, the promise of God there adds to that beauty from that. He talks about from the book the same of your hearing, whether it's the sounds of nature there that you hear, whether it's music, that you like it, you want to hear. You listen to the same songs for 50, 60 years, because you like it. There, your ear's never satisfied. You say, well, turn it up. Even turn it up a little bit. One more time. Yes. We see and hear because we see and hear, and so we want to see and hear evermore. Again, repeating the statement, neither the eye nor the ear is ever satisfied. Okay, and this, we're not going to have too much time to get into this, I know, because it's going to take some time. Is that the first or second? Second? Well, we got no time at all. We'll pick up here then next Lord's Day, Lord willing, talking about nothing new under the sun. Okay. Appreciate the comments and questions.